Good morning and welcome to Carolina Cares, an iHeart radio production. My name is Tyler Ryan. We are hailing from the flagship family of iHeart stations in Columbia, South Carolina, WVOC. So happy for you to join us here in the South Carolina Radio Network as well. You know, flooding in the Palmetto State, unfortunately, it's a way of life. Like many states with a large coastline, abundant lakes and rivers, frequent rain, that all can create havoc, damage, and sometimes very unsafe conditions for just about every part of South Carolina and states like the Palmetto State. Not to mention, of course, the fact that it seems like we are right in the sights of the many hurricanes and tropical storms that seem to, every year, increase in frequency. Have you noticed that? We set records again this year for the hurricanes that came towards the U.S. coastline. And, of course, most of us remember that great big flood in 2015. Remember that flood 5 years later leaves its footprint, scarring in towns, homes, buildings, and even the environment in general still weighs on that 2015 flood. You know, there's another flood concern and issue as well. That's pollution. So for many communities, it isn't necessarily the monster storm, or a 1,000-year flood that can cause damage and risk safety of houses and family and property. It's man-made items that are simply cast into the rivers and streams, just people chucking their stuff into the environment. Even with a simple bit of rain, these items, these TVs, these bottles, whatever you might find, they can choke a normal flow of a waterway in a neighborhood and create a very unsafe situation. In October of 2018, Governor Henry McMaster created the South Carolina Floodwater Commission. The commission's work is to work directly with communities, businesses, and other groups and organizations to create and execute, that's the key part, comprehensive plans and programs that provide relief to the chronically flooded areas of the Palmetto State. Now, to lead the commission, the governor tapped the talents of a man who's no stranger to environmental impacts and human footprints thereon. Prominent Camden attorney, former commanding general, Major General, as a matter of fact, of the State Guard, Tom Mullikin. Major General, thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Thank you, Tyler, and thank you for what you do. I love your show, and we appreciate you bringing these important messages to folks across the Carolinas.
Well, absolutely. And as a lover of the environment myself, listeners know I'm an avid outdoorsman and diver. And, the environment to me is it's a huge impact that everything we do has on it, for sure. And so it's a passion button for me as well when we're talking about ways to keep what Mother Nature has given us, what God has given us, as clean and pristine as possible. I mean, I get we have to live, and there's things that are going to happen, but we can do certain things to prevent the damage. Let's talk about the Floodwater Commission. Let's go back to October of 18, and I'm sure the conversations began well before October of 18, but let's go back to the formation of the commission. Tell me about that.
The governor and I had worked very closely together when he was lieutenant governor, and even before that, as a member of the South Carolina State Guard and in the reserves, looking at these issues that South Carolina has been challenged by with flooding. Mm-hmm. And we really were seeing the confluence of three issues that put South Carolina in a fairly unique position. We've got extreme weather coming off the coast, and you mentioned the hurricanes, the tropical storms that seem to be intensifying every year. That really culminated with Joaquin. But in addition to that, we just have ongoing coastal erosion in towns and cities across our coastline. Mm-hmm. We see what academics refer to as nuisance flooding. On a sunny day, rain, we see communities flooding in Charleston downtown. It's very difficult to drive after a heavy rain.
Right.
And the reason for that is sea level rise. But the third issue that we deal with that a lot of folks don't recognize is that we actually deal with circumstances arising from storms coming up from the Gulf, because those storms drop lots of water into North Carolina, into Appalachia, mm-hmm. and those waters make their way into South Carolina. So we see it's a fairly unique geographic position that we have dealing with this in three different areas. Mm-hmm. And the governor took a stand. He said it's time to do something. We need to quit talking about it. We don't need to have more plans necessarily. We need to get people out, and we need to deal with this issue, and we need to start doing something about it right now.
And it's interesting you point out the runoff from, say, North Carolina, because that's, as a weatherman, then we talk about flooding and people ask, how come there's flooding 3 days after a storm when it's bright and sunny? and that flood's coming through. And that's exactly to your point is, it's gravity. This is where rivers go. They travel through South Carolina. So even if we don't get hit with a major storm or a lot of rain, it goes to North Carolina, eastern Tennessee. We still get the residual effects a few days later, and boom, we're back into a flood situation.
And that's what we see if you look at some of the areas that are hardest hit, for example, over in Marion County, where you have the confluence of the Little PD and the Lumber River, right there in Nichols, little community cellars. These places, there are people out of their homes today from Joaquin.
Wow.
South Carolinians don't realize how close we came to a Katrina and Rita type of catastrophe during Joaquin because we had waters rushing down from the upstate, reaching dams, and it created a cascading effect. By the time it got to Columbia, the water was rushing. It was much more water than our river systems could hold. And we had dams break in Columbia that had bad situations, but we were very close. And were it not for the great work of the South Carolina National Guard, State Guard, and other local responders, we could have seen something much more catastrophic.
Right.
We're going to plan for that. What we're doing now, Tyler, is moving from a scenario where we are increasing our 911 capabilities to leaning forward saying, how do we, in the governor's words, how do we embrace this water and create resiliency strategies that allow us to avoid the catastrophe, not just plan for what happens after the catastrophe.
And that's sometimes a unique way to look at things, especially with governmental agencies as well, because we're so, I think, trained, even in first responders. A lot of times, you're right, it's the reaction to stuff. We're reacting to the crimes as opposed to taking proactivity and proaction.
I feel, and I've done this work all over the world, that South Carolina is leading the way. It's a very difficult issue. It's a difficult conversation to have because in the public square, the issue of amplified global climate change has been hijacked by politicians who largely don't know what they're talking about and using it for political gain. But you see something going on at a macro level and at a micro level. At a macro level, we hear people talk about greenhouse gas emissions that are released that become a part of our atmosphere. That's a global issue. South Carolina will take a leadership position because of some things that we're doing here, and we'll have one of the largest reductions of any governmental unit in the world. We're taking 4 coal-fired power plants off the grid.
Wow.
Replacing them with much more efficient, much more cost-effective utility-scale solar. So we're going to have our total footprint, adding to that macro issue, is 69 million metric tons. And we'll be reducing that just on those 4 coal plants by about 13 million metric ton reduction. We're doing much more in that area, but we're doing it, and we're doing it in a way that we understand that we cannot ruin our economy while we address the environmental issue. And here's the good news for all your listeners. Environmental sustainability and economic sustainability are not mutually exclusive. The truth is, if they're not working hand in hand, they're probably not working. Okay. So we're looking at this at a macro level. At a micro level, we're beginning to take steps that address creating resiliency strategies here in South Carolina. We're doing that. We're starting in the ocean, and we're building strategies all the way to the mountain. You mentioned one of those, and I'll come to that. But we're building an artificial reef system, what we're calling our smart reef, so that we start there. It will have, these smart reefs will have some impact on wave attenuation and storm surge. We are creating a living shoreline. We're going to have smart rivers. We're going to know better through LIDAR and other technologies what our river systems look like. And part of the smart river system is cleaning the rivers. Mm-hmm. People see some of what we do and they say, oh, they need to be focused on larger issues. But the truth is, there is no panacea. Well, we live at a time when people largely think somebody else will take care of it. And to the extent that they have any responsibility, they want a fast food type of solution. There is no fast food type of resolution because these issues are very much interrelated. So as we clean rivers and creeks and culverts from the mountains to the sea, we're going to begin to open up these natural waterways, allow water to flow in an efficient way all the way and out into the ocean. So that we see a great deal of work being done academically with some of the brightest minds in the world, and then, frankly, just through a lot of elbow grease.
Sure.
And the governor wants action.
Speaking this morning on Carolina Cares with the chairman of the South Carolina Floodwater Commission, Major General Tom Mullikin. Details we'll put at the Facebook page, and of course you can log on to WVOC and get links to the commission and this important work that we're talking about this morning. I want to go back just for a second. I want to talk just a bit about the erosion, because that's a true issue. If anybody who lives on the coast, as you're talking about, you can see the effects in downtown Charleston when it drizzles almost. You get flooding everywhere. I mean, and things are not the erosion issue. It's like that in 5 Points in Columbia, South Carolina. But as far as the erosion issue, obviously that's a micro effect because it's happening here in South Carolina, but it's a macro effect, and that's because of greenhouse and because of the glaciers melting. Is that what's creating that erosion, or is that just a natural thing in time, Tom?
Well, that's a great question, Tyler. So let me start off by saying, as we venture into this conversation about climate, that the climate has changed throughout all of time, so that if we want to have an informed conversation about it, you really can't. To date, the conversation in the public square was either you can choose Armageddon or the climate's not changing. And neither one of those positions have proven to be correct. The climate has changed throughout all of time. And what we're looking at is to what degree have humans' actions amplified global climatic change? And to the extent that they have impacted it, is there any way that we can retard or reverse that amplification? So what we're looking at is a series of things, and it is very much interrelated. So you have the macro impact, and then it's impacting. The difficulty, Tyler, is that it impacts different parts of the country and different parts of the world in different ways. Here we see the biggest impacts are from sea level rise and coastal erosion. I'll come to that. But out west, we burn more than 6 million acres with increased wildfires. In parts of North America, the Mojave Desert, other places, we see greater desertification, so that each of these have their own unique and complex scientific conversation. Here, yes. Are we seeing coastal erosion due to sea level rise? The answer is absolutely yes. And this isn't 40 years ago when this conversation got started, where it was largely an esoteric type of academic conversation. We're no longer just modeling. We're measuring. We're about 4 millimeters a year increase, and that increase causes dramatic impacts along the coast. If we continue on this same trajectory, and we see in 40 years or so a six foot rise, we're going to see dramatic differences along our coastline.
Sure.
I would encourage the listeners to go to the interactive map on NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, and plug in 6 foot rise and look at what that looks like. It's dramatic.
Well, think about that to illustrate. You think 6 feet. Okay, so 6 foot rise, 1 square foot, 6 foot, but then you amplify that by the entire coast, and I guess I would argue the entire east coast of the country. But let's look at South Carolina. So that's 6, and then how many feet do we have of coastline from North Myrtle Beach down to Hilton Head? That's a whole lot of real estate that is going to be not here. This is going to be not part of the state.
And that really brings up the big issue, which is globally, more than 40% of the world's population lives within 60 miles of the coast. So that when you talk about sea level rise, it has immediate impacts on human populations. The answer for folks that don't want to go to NOAA is 6 foot rise in South Carolina. Most of Charleston is underwater. The Barrier Islands are gone. A lot of our coastline is gone.
Holy smokes.
And it has immediate impacts with that kind of, and what we're seeing is this incremental increase. It's like boiling frogs. If you threw them in red hot boiling water, they'd hop out, but it's slow boiling. So people don't know what's going on. The frogs are staying in the pot, and here we are. But we are seeing demonstrable sea level rise, and it is going to have impacts, and we do need to do something about it.
Do we know?
It's not just.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, I have a question. But you go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll introduce this thought. It's for a longer conversation, but we also see this is where the environment meets healthcare. Because of the sea level rise, we begin to see an issue that is vitally important to human life, which is saltwater intrusion. Water comprises about 70% of all of Earth. But of all that water, only 2.7% is fresh water. And of that 2.7%, only 1% is water that we can get to. The other is captured in the ice continent down in Antarctica or Greenland, a lot of our glaciers. And so we begin to impact our drinking water supply when we see saltwater intrusion. That by itself is a huge issue. Even if we weren't going to displace human populations, the ability to have clean, fresh drinking water is an even larger conversation. Okay. So forgive me, I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, not at all. Not at all. The question I wanted to circle back around to real quick too is you talked and mentioned about the fact that the climate change is a natural thing that's happened since the beginning of time. Do you know what is our input in that? If what percentage of it would happen no matter what, and how much are we adding to that? Is it 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% increase in the global warming because of what we globally do, whether it's coal or whether it whatever adds to that greenhouse effect?
That's a great question, man. The answer to that question is something that often divides people, because the best science I've ever seen, I've never seen humans' input annually be double digits. The number that tends to get quoted more than any other is 6%. Mm-hmm. 6% of those greenhouse gases that are emitted every year are from humans. The rest is naturally occurring. So let's talk about what are the greenhouse gases and why is that important? The 6 greenhouse gases that the UN follows as part of what started with the Earth Summit, Kyoto Protocol, and those successor agreements. There's 6 gases: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, perfluorocarbon, hydrofluorocarbon, sulfur hexafluoride. Those molecules are the fibers that make up that thin blanket that is wrapped around Earth that most scientists credit for why we have life on Earth, called the atmosphere. We only have one atmosphere. So if you can imagine, if you have a blanket that's made thicker because you have more fibers in it, it's going to create more warmth. And they call it the greenhouse gas effect, just like the greenhouse in people's backyards. The sun rays come through the atmosphere, they hit the Earth's surface, they bounce up, and it keeps that heat pushed down on Earth. Mm-hmm. The thicker the blanket, the warmer the Earth. And so that's the global macro issue. These international agreements have been an abject failure because they were based on an agreement that wrote out nearly half of the world's emissions, and today it's more than half of so-called developing nations. Okay. The developing nations had no reduction criteria. And who does that include? That includes the number 1 emitter, China, a top 5 emitter, India, Brazil, others. Today it's over 50% of the world's emissions are written out of these international protocols.
That doesn't make any sense to me, because those are China, India, Brazil. Those are major countries that do, I mean, obviously that's forefront, and without getting into the political spectrum, those are major countries with major industrial output.
It's absolutely counterintuitive. And, you have to ask yourself, why was that? Well, you look at where those so-called developing nations, and we can argue whether that's accurate, are, and you see where a lot of manufacturing has gone that's left the United States and the EU. And when these manufacturers leave areas that are highly regulated with enforced regulations that go to places like China, Vietnam, Cambodia, places like that, you see not only an increase because of carbon intensity of the greenhouse gases, where, for example, an energy-intensive industry would have a 5 million metric ton footprint, becomes 15 million in China, but you also see greater release of other listed pollutants. So, for example, today, the highest emitter of ambient mercury, which nobody debates the negative health impacts of mercury, highest emitter of ambient mercury today is China. And NASA has some wonderful satellite images of this toxic cloud coming from China, dusting Japan, and then making its way over to the United States. In many ways, we're still not talking politics. I'm simply telling you what has been documented. The highest emitter of sulfates on the West Coast, China. The highest emitter of particulate matter or smog indicators, China.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a statistic for you if you want to get into the policy piece of this. Since 97, when the Kyoto Protocol was first formed, China's emission, its emission addition since 1997, what they've added to their emissions is larger than our growth. So if the United States was to go to zero, and China continues to rise at the same level, we're still going to see increases in global greenhouse gas emissions. We have to get people away from, on that issue at a macro level, thinking the U.S. we're going to be the panacea for the world, because we're not. What we can do is what we are doing, which is through market-based solutions, begin to offer ways that we can, in fact, see a tremendous reduction in greenhouse gases while not destroying our economy.
And that's important. And I know that folks, who and I'm one of them. I know you're one who have great concern for the environment. The economy, it goes hand in hand. You can't forego one for the other. And I don't, whatever side of the coin you're on, you can't. I think it's foolish to forego one or the other. You can't pave the earth, but you certainly can't shut down an economy, a global economy either. There's got to be that. And I think you're right. I think it's on the micro level, because clearly globally we can't all get along. So it is on the smaller efforts of the South Carolina Floodwater Commission to start looking at those. And as I know you've done with the projects, and I want to talk about the Smart Reef and power plant. I know you got some cool stuff coming up, but it's going to rely on these smaller organizations and passionate people who understand, rather than probably get their information on 140 or 240 characters. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And what I can tell you from having traveled and done work all over the world is where you have a bad economy, you have a bad environment, because people are more concerned about eating than they are about protecting their environment. And this, I can tell you, is truth, is that people won't do what they can't afford to do. So let's break it down in ways that people can begin to demonstrate leadership from the ground up. Here we are in the middle of the Bible Belt, and I'd simply ask listeners, if you're of that faith, go to Genesis, the first book of the Bible, chapter 2, verse 15, where it says, God put man in the garden to work and to care for the environment. The whole political conversation is broken down by some only focus on the working part, drill, baby, drill, and some only focus on the care part. But it's a duality of burden, and it's that balance. And it's that balance that we need to bring into our strategies, that we need to find a way that we can work in the garden and also care for it as stewards of the garden.
Speaking this morning with the chairman of the South Carolina Floodwater Commission, Major General Tom Mullikin. The commission, I know you mentioned earlier the Smart Reef, and we've got just a few minutes left, but I want to talk about the Smart Reef, and I know there's a big program called Power Plant coming up. But Smart Reef, you're working off the coast over, I know you work and you're associated as a professor for coastal Carolina as well, and you work with the environmentalists there. But what is a Smart Reef? You alluded to it a few minutes ago, but maybe just a quick little synopsis of what that is really going to do.
We're going to rebuild a reef system along South Carolina's coastline. And people know that the reefs are the kidney of the ocean. So reefs are a very important part of our ocean life. It's also the beginning of life. So we'll begin to see an increased growth of marine life. We'll also be measuring along the way wave attenuation and storm surge. Can we build these reefs in a way, because they are the first line of attack. If you look at what was there, what the Lord built for us to protect us against heavy storms and storm surge, the first level of protection was the reef system. Mm-hmm. And then the barrier islands. You know why they call them barrier islands?
Well, they're barriers.
Because they're barriers. Right? I mean,
imagine that.
So why do they call brownfields brownfields? Because they were brown. I mean, if it was hard, I wouldn't understand it. What you have is, so with the Smart Reef system, we're not only building the reefs and continuing to build on the good work of our South Carolina Department of Natural Resources and bringing private sector involved, like Yamaha, who's been a big sponsor of this, is that we're putting technology on there so that we can measure these things and have a better idea of exactly what we're doing on these important issues such as wave attenuation. We want to be able to break the waves, and we want to be able to positively impact storm surge so that we can begin this continuum of protection that starts exactly the way that it was designed. We're going to start in the ocean. And with these projects, we're using students. Coastal Carolina University, Dr. Paul Gaze, and others have taken a tremendous leadership position on putting this together. They're working with NOAA and other federal agencies and other universities on this technology. And it is really an exciting project. We'll go back down in the ocean in January and install more technology and install more reefs. Tyler, I hope you'll join us for that.
I would be honored.
And it's a very important part of what we're doing. South Carolina is no longer sitting in smoky conference rooms at a Capitol talking about what somebody else needs to do. What we're doing is what needs to be done. And there are some that when we focused on the artificial reef, people were criticizing us for what we're not doing in the rivers. We're doing everything we can do as fast as we can do, and it's all part of a very thoughtful continuum. And part of the 400-page plus report that we delivered to the governor. I love saying that when I took him the report, Governor, thank you for allowing me to help with this and chair this commission. He said, "Oh no, Tomcat, we just getting started. Get the band back together. We're going to do what we said now. This isn't a report that's going to sit on somebody's desk."
Sure.
And so that's what we've done. And that reef is a big part of that.
We've got just a couple of seconds left, but I did want to bring up real quick. I know you spoke about cleaning up rivers, and to your point, I know that the group, a big group of volunteers a couple weeks ago in Irmo, South Carolina, went and cleaned up a flood-prone neighborhood that floods when it rains, and you guys pulled out BB guns and toys and pools and TVs, and oh my God, the crap that you pulled out of there.
If you can imagine anything that is in somebody's garage or carport that could be washed away because of all the flooding that's gone on, the heavy rains is now in ditches, culverts, creeks, and rivers. And that's a problem on two different levels. The first is that it's obstructing natural waterways. It's obstructing our ability for water to move from the mountains to the sea, which is what we talked about. But it's also creating the possibility of severe epidemiological impacts, because what have we found? We found everything you just mentioned: gas cans, right? Radiator fluid, oils. We found a number of pesticides. And we have found these in creeks beside neighborhoods that are pulling their drinking water off of wells. And so we have these poisons that are leaching into the waterways
in our own backyards. And that's the thing. That's the thing.
And that's as important a reason as the water flow, to get out into these neighborhoods and clean these up.
Tom, I got to stop you right there. We are already out of time. There's so much more I want to talk about with the environment. I know you're involved with an organization called SC7. There's so much more that you're doing important work on so many levels, and I'm going to bring you back on the show very soon. But as far as the Floodwater Commission, there's a lot more that you're involved with, and I want to make sure folks know about the Floodwater Commission, what its mission is, and we'll put links again at the Facebook page and on WVOC so you can find out more about the South Carolina Floodwater Commission. Major General Tom Mullikin, I appreciate your service to country, community, and your continued service to the state, and I say to the earth. I appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you for what you do for our community and helping educate on these important issues.
Guys, this has been Carolina Cares, an iHeart Radio production. We'd love to hear from you. You can write to me, Tyler at Tyler Ryan, if you have an idea for a topic you'd like to discuss. Until then, I will speak with you in 7 days.